Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. The new 2024 edition of Dungeons & Dragons is out now, or at least partially out via the recently released Player's Handbook. I have poured over, studied, crammed, and absorbed the new book, and based on my 9 years of experience of publicly playing 5th edition here on my YouTube channel, I am prepared to present to you all the 33 biggest changes that are presented here in the Player's Handbook. If you enjoy the content and these kinds of D&D videos, please check out patreon.com/RogueWatson. Now, this order is not numbered by importance or ranking or anything, but it's kind of organized by type, like general rules at first, and then I'll get into some class-specific stuff, and as well as spells. And at the end, I will also reveal my top 5 changes that I think you, as a dungeon master, or perhaps your dungeon master, should probably implement as soon as possible. For the purposes of this video, by the way, I'll be using the Roll20 version of the Player's Handbook, which is what you see right here. So let's dive right into my list. First, I'm going to say number 1 is surprise has changed. The surprise round used to be where if you managed to surprise your foes or your foes surprised you, they would get an entire free round of combat off. This is devastatingly powerful for both sides. One way or the other, they can drastically swing combat. So I am a huge fan of this change because, by the way, the new change is if a combatant is surprised by combat, that combatant has disadvantage on initiative. So it's way less of a thing. And maybe you could argue like, oh, well, it's hardly worth surprising anybody. I think disadvantage is still a pretty good thing to bestow upon enemies and still gives you obviously an advantage to probably try to go first. But it no longer becomes this huge, huge big deal where the enemy is just so severely hamstrung by a surprise round. So basically, there is no such thing as the surprise round anymore. It's just disadvantage for anybody who is surprised. Number 2, I'm going to say is Weapon Mastery. This is a pretty hyped part of the new D&D 2024 book. It's designed to give marshals some extra effects on their weapons. I would argue that it's probably inspired by Baldur's Gate 3, like a lot of abilities in here are. And however, if you are coming from Baldur's Gate 3, you may be a bit disappointed because they are not the big, like, short rest activated kind of special ability powers that were available in Baldur's Gate. Instead, they're just kind of extra little buffs or debuffs or tiny effects that are added to certain weapons. So there's 8 of them that exist, and they're spread out amongst all the different weapons. All the weapons basically are the same, I believe, from the 2014 edition, except now they all have these extra masteries. In order to take advantage of a weapon mastery, by the way, you have to have the weapon mastery trait, which is only available for martial classes like fighter, rogue, ranger, paladin, etc. They get, I think, 2, and then maybe they get more as they level up, and that kind of unlocks the mastery for that weapon. But there's some really interesting abilities here, like Cleave lets you get a free attack on another creature that's nearby. Graze allows you to do some damage even if you miss a target. Push, you can push them 10 feet away, or perhaps you can topple them over by knocking them down. You can give them disadvantage or give yourself advantage with Sap or Vex. So I think this is all very nice. I haven't obviously seen this in practice yet, so I'd be very curious to see how much people actually use it or how much it matters in terms of, oh, I want to use this weapon for this effect. I would need to see it in action for a while to see how much it actually affects the gameplay and whether or not it makes it an exciting part of the gameplay without making things too much overhead, I think is fair to say, by giving you a bunch of like new, abilities to use. But overall, I'd say I'm positive on mastery, and that's obviously a huge change. There was nothing like this in the previous 5th edition version. Another change, which is maybe not that big of a deal, but I thought it was worth mentioning, is that we have some new actions available. I think I just like the way that the actions are organized now. We have the usual attack, dash, disengage, dodge, help, hide actions, but then we get specifically, I believe, study, influence, and magic is now an action. So you can take a magic action, which means obviously most of the time you're casting a spell or using a magic item, but it could be certain other class features and abilities, say they're using a magic action. For example, a cleric's channel divinity in this new player's handbook says that you are using a magic action in order to do that thing. I think it just helps clears up some confusion. For example, if you're in an anti-magic field and you're like, well, I'm going to use channel divinity, and the DM has to be like, oh, is that a magic effect or is it something else going on? And this kind of clearly defines stuff as, you know, it is a magic effect or it's a different kind of action. Also, I think it's nice to clearly define influence and study as specific actions, similar to search. Or basically, anytime you're making a specific skill check to do a thing, that costs an action. So, for example, if you have, you know, your bard player says, well, I just want to talk down, you know, the enemy bandits instead of actually having them attack or somebody. I don't want to use my, you know, intimidation or persuasion check to do that. The DM say, okay, then give me an influence check. And there's a, by the way, there's new rules when it comes to using influence. For example, influence is a DC 15 or the target's intelligence score, and the DM determines whether they are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, which confers either advantage, neutral, or disadvantage on the roll, and then the DM still has to determine whether or not they would even ever do this action or not. So I just think they're very well defined rules that I really appreciate having in there rather than being very loosey-goosey. And that brings us to our next point, which is going to be number 4, which is the hide action is now, I think, a little bit better defined. And in fact, if I want to look at rules definitions for hide, this might be a better way to look at the actions. So with the hide action, before it was basically just up to like DMs, and it was super like just loosey-goosey and annoying as hell as for a DM to try to figure out how the hide surprise things work, basically. So now it is defined as you can take the hide action and you have to succeed on a DC 15 stealth check. You have to be heavily obscured or behind 3/4 or better cover and be out of enemy line of sight. That is just boom, 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 things that have to happen. No more like DM has determined this or that. And you now have the invisible condition while you are hidden, which is a completely new condition, I believe. We did not have an invisible condition, but we had obviously the invisibility spell, which granted people invisibility, but I don't believe there was technically a condition called invisible. Now there is. So with the invisible condition, you have advantage on initiative rolls. You are concealed, so you can't be targeted by any effects that require you to be seen. And then attacks against you have disadvantage, and your attack rolls have advantage. And then I believe whenever you attack, cast a spell, or do anything, you then break the invisible condition. I believe it says whenever things that grant you invisible, that happen. So I just appreciate that these are more coded into the game and appear to be just a lot easier to figure out how to run. And by the way, that check that you make, that stealth check that has to be better than a 15, then becomes the DC for any creature searching for you, which I believe was pretty much always the case. And it does say as soon as you take an action, it would break your invisibility or your sneaking or whatever. And then there are other things like, in fact, one of the new rogue subclasses, I believe the assassin, says that when you attack as a high level assassin ability, now it doesn't like break that invisible condition. So very interesting to have these kind of rules defined. Number 5, another big change is exhaustion. I think we can actually use the rules. The rules glossary, by the way, is fabulous. I'm sure a lot of people have already told you, or you've seen it yourself. You just have all the rules instantly here. That's pretty easy to find. So exhaustion is a lot different. Exhaustion in the 2014 edition was different cumulative debuffs that happen at different levels of exhaustion. Exhaustion, by the way, is kind of conferred usually just per the DM, like different things are happening. Actually, there are new things like malnutrition and dehydration. I didn't include that in here, but that can give you exhaustion, but usually it's the DM giving you exhaustion for whatever reason. Exhaustion in the 2014 edition was you would have like a disadvantage on ability checks, and then your speed would be halved, and your ability check and your attack rolls would then be disadvantaged. Basically, everybody had to look it up every time on what the different disadvantages were, and the level 1 exhaustion was never that big of a deal. So it was a very odd kind of system. Here it is so much cleaner and so much simpler, where every time you gain a level of exhaustion, you have a -2 to all D20 rolls. This includes ability checks, attack rolls, and saving throws. That is a monumentally nasty debuff. -2 to basically all of the rolls that you make is, whoa, that's nasty and those are cumulative. Every single level of exhaustion is another -2. And also for every level of exhaustion, your speed is reduced by a number of feet equal to 5 times your exhaustion level. So basically -5 feet per exhaustion level. That is so freaking nasty. And as a DM, I love it. I love it because it's immediately more nasty for having a level of exhaustion. So I think you can balance things appropriately from there. Your player's going to care a lot more, and you're going to see its effects a hell of a lot more versus maybe hardly ever seeing them before. So Exhaustion, your players are probably going to hate it, but I think it's cleaner rules, and I think it's a lot better now. My number 6 is actually on this page right now. It's Grappled. Grappled works a little differently now. Whenever you grapple somebody, you make an unarmed strike against them, which is using your strength plus your proficiency bonus, and it technically includes a bit of a debuff. I don't believe it had that before. Before, I believe the grappled condition, which was a condition, just said your speed is 0. However, now you also have an extra debuff that says you have disadvantage on attack rolls against any target other than the grappler. Now, that's pretty niche because 9 times out of 10, anybody who is grappled by somebody else is either going to A, try to escape said grapple, or B, just turn around or, and just fight the person who's been grappling them because you have no disadvantage or anything up there. But whatever, it's fine. Like if you have a monster or something that's been grappled, it can't just turn around and attack your nearby wizard if it had range or whatever. So I think it's just a nice little debuff on there. And I think, again, the rules are pretty clear. It was one of the ones that was thankfully not too ill-defined in the older edition, and people could figure out the grappling rules pretty well, but it's just a little bit better. 1 grapple per hand. It just kind of goes over the rules a little bit more. The fact that you're making unarmed strike, it's a little bit cleaner, and I appreciate that extra little disadvantage debuff as well. For number 7, I have to remember where I put this ability. There it is. So number 7 on my list is Heroic Inspiration is different than regular Inspiration. I don't know why I had to call it something different, but than the original edition. So the original edition, which I completely forgot about, honestly, is that you can give yourself advantage on a roll. I think if I'm remembering this correctly, whenever you make any kind of D20 roll, you can use inspiration to give yourself advantage. What that technically means, if you already have advantage, then you can't use inspiration. I think what a lot of DMs ended up doing later on, or house ruling, whatever, is that, hey, inspiration is just a reroll of anything. That's what it ended up being in my games. I don't know when I changed it or if I always changed it or what happened there, but that's definitely what it became, is like, hey, you can always change it. So technically I've always been doing this rule. And this is one of the funny rules that the designer said, like, yeah, everybody kind of does it this way, so we just made it this way from here on out, which is Heroic Inspiration is a reroll of any of your D20 dice. You can also, when you are given Heroic Inspiration, if you already have Heroic Inspiration, you can give it to another player. I don't know if that was technically coded in the rules or not. A lot of people do that anyway, but that's kind of nice effect to have. And also, I won't get into the new classes or species just yet, but humans get a free Heroic Inspiration after each long rest, which is pretty big. You just give yourself Inspiration. So pretty nice effect in there. So basically just a buff for Heroic Inspiration. Yay. Number 8, I don't know if this is on the rules definitions, maybe. We can go down to long rest. This is a very, very minor thing that a lot of people probably missed. But for a long rest, you regain all lost hit points and all spent hit dice. Some of you may recall that technically in the 2024 edition of 5th edition D&D, you regain all hit points and half your hit dice on a long rest. I don't know why it was like that. It just seemed like weirdly extra punishing, even though you should I think you should fully recharge after every long rest. So I'm glad that's the case now. It just seemed like it was a little bit confusing before, where we just couldn't quite fully recover everything after a long rest. Now you do. So now you do recover all spent hit dice, all hit points. If any of your stuff was reduced, your max hit points, your ability scores, anything, that's all healed. The only thing that's not completely healed technically is the exhaustion condition is only decreased by 1 after a long rest. So cumulative versions of exhaustion is very, very nasty if they only go down by 1 every long rest. And given that they're, I think, more powerful, your DM just has to be aware that exhaustion is a little bit nastier. That was number 8. Number 9, I don't actually remember where this is going to be on the rules, but it's essentially the rules for knocking a creature unconscious, which is if you want to, interrogate a creature later on, for example. The original rule was you would still drop them down to 0 hit points, but then they would have they would be unconscious and stable, basically as if they had been stabilized and no longer making death saves. It's a little bit different now, where instead you can choose to drop them to 1 hit point and then they will be unconscious. And the main reason I care about this, I know it's very nitpicky, is that now you no longer have to like wait 1d4 hours for them to heal naturally, or give them like a healing spell or potion or something lame like that, even though you're about to like, you've probably tied them up, you're about to interrogate them or something. So now you've got them at 1 hit point, they've got the exhaustion, and then whenever you want, you can just wake them up, and then they're ready to talk to. So just very clean rules on knocking a creature unconscious, I find is a little bit easier now. Number 10 on my list. Is it on here? I hope it's on here. I'll be embarrassed if it's not. Yes, it is. Bloodied is back. I noticed this. There's like one ability, one class feature, and I can't remember what it is now, but there was one class or subclass feature that had something to do with a bloodied creature. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Bloodied, I never played 4th edition, but I recall that I believe that is a 4th edition thing, which literally means a creature is down to half its hit points or fewer. So it just technically cares if basically creatures are heavily injured. I forget what thing that was that pointed it to it, but I was like, all right, well, Bloodied, I believe, wasn't a thing in 5th edition. There was nothing about the Bloodied. It was, it wasn't a condition or an effect or anything like that. So we haven't seen the Dungeon Master's Guide yet, and we definitely haven't seen the Monster Manual yet. It would be really cool now, if I'm kind of excited now that Bloodied is back, that maybe we can see some monsters be like, get like new abilities or have new features if they're bloodied, for example. I always love that in video games. I guess bosses, but a lot of creatures might just take on different effects or things once they get like more, damaged, and the battle continues on, just to help, make things a little more interesting as the battle progresses, if the creature otherwise doesn't have a lot of different abilities going on or features. So that could be cool, but it's more about like the potential of what Bloodied can mean versus necessarily what it is now, because I hardly saw anything that actually uses Bloodied right now from the player standpoint. Let's see, can I find this one? Number 11 on my list is involving falling. I thought it'd be under exploration, maybe not. Well, I guess we can look at rules definitions under falling. Maybe it's under falling. Falling. Yes. Okay. So falling, there's a whole hazard section, but falling I thought was most interesting because it has an extra, which always the same, by the way. Every 10 feet you fall, you take 1d6 bludgeoning damage. That's the same, which I think is hilariously not actually that painful for any creature, really. That's, I don't know, gravity is not as big of a deal in the Innate universe. But the important thing here is that a creature that falls into water or another liquid can use its reaction to make a DC 15 athletics or acrobatics check. So you're not making a save, interestingly. The only thing you're doing is a reaction to hit the surface head or feet first. On a successful check, any damage resulting from the fall is halved. I think a lot of DMs out there have, come up with rules to try and have, because there's like, oh, I'm falling into water, can I make like this? And you try to do like, okay, yeah, we can do it. I'm so glad that they defined this as like, yes, here's a feature. If you're falling into water, I literally just ran a session in our current nautical campaign where we were fighting in 50-foot tall cliffs surrounded by water everywhere, and both players and monsters were knocking each other off said cliffs into the water. This would have come in super freaking handy to be able to have people make a reaction to make a DC 15 athletics or acrobatics check to take half damage. I think I implemented that already. But it was a weird edge case. So now it's like defined as the rules, which again, I very much appreciate defining that as a feature. Number 11, falling into water. Number 12, drinking a potion is now officially a bonus action. I don't actually know if that's in here under the rules or not. It's like under drinking maybe. This is something, again, Baldur's Gate people will recognize, and I think a lot of DMs were using as their house rules going forward, because previously to drink a potion of healing required an action, which felt real bad if you're being attacked by monsters and you're like, well, I'm going to try to heal like 2d4 plus 2, but that's all I do that turn. It's technically woefully inefficient for you to do that. Now you can do it as a bonus action. Suddenly that opens up your options and allows you to heal and still be able to do an action. So that really helps players and fix the action economy quite a bit, even though players already kick ass on the action economy for the most part. I think that allows you to actually heal instead of just healing people that are already down. So potions, drinking potions, or administering potions as a bonus action, big plus. This one, other one, number 13, I could not find at all in Roll20, but I know it is in the books. I'm staring at it on page 37 of the Player's Handbook. There are tables for standard languages and rare languages. And this is an important distinction because players can only choose at character creation standard languages. I believe you get common plus any two other languages. The languages include like Draconic, Dwarvish, Elvish, Gnomish, Orcish, all that good stuff. Which means, importantly, you can't have players randomly have, you know, Abyssal or Deep Speech or Undercommon, you know, all those, to where the player, you know, the DM's like, oh, this is written in Undercommon. And then some random player's like, oh, yeah, I have an Undercommon. And you're like, why? And they're like, I don't know. I just picked one of the languages at character create. You know, it doesn't. Sometimes they may, you know, have like, oh, well, my uncle was a mind flayer or something. But for the most part, it's just kind of random because they can just choose whatever languages. Now that is not the case. You can only choose among the standard languages, and the rare languages actually seem like they matter, and it's more difficult to decipher them, understand them, which means maybe comprehend languages and tongues and those spells become a lot bigger deal. As a DM, I think this is a big change that I think will go unnoticed by a lot of folks. The fact that now there is a distinction between standard and rare languages. And as far as I know, you cannot choose rare languages. And somebody can correct me on this, but I went through all the classes and I couldn't see any classes or effects that even let you learn a rare language at any point. So it may really be like by DM's choice kind of a thing. So very, very interesting, I think. All right, now we are officially going to start talking about classes. So the very first change I'm going to say at number 14 is that all classes get subclasses at level 3. That is a big change. Before, most classes got subclass level 3, but some got it at level 2, like, what was maybe like a wizard, and I think cleric got it at level 1. I think warlock got it at level 1. I think wizard got it at level 2. I appreciate everybody gets a level 3. I think that's just going to make things a lot simpler, kind of balances everything out, makes it easier for tiers of play. And for example, they recommend that veteran players go ahead and start at 3rd level. That way you can, boom, jump right into your subclass. Great. I'm a fan so far. Number 15, class skills. A lot, I would say most class skills now partially recharge on a short rest. For example, the Barbarian Signature Rage feature used to only recharge, you'd have a limited amount, you know, they'd scale up by level, and they would only recharge on a long rest. Now, you regain 1 expended use when you finish a short rest, and all uses when you finish a long rest. And there's several abilities that do this now. Channel Divinity used to have 1 Channel Divinity as a cleric, maybe as a paladin also, and then you would get that back on a short rest. Now, it's actually similar to the Rage, where you still have 1 back on a short rest, but you actually have more of them, and you get all of them back on a long rest. So you can potentially use that more often. Wild Shape has swung in the other direction. We're going to talk about Druids in a second. Wild Shape now is similar, or it's different now. You used to get all your uses back on a short rest. Now you only get 1 use back on a short rest, and you get all uses back on a long rest. And also the second wind for a fighter. I forget how many you get or how that scales, but similarly, it used to be you get it every short rest. Now you still get it every short rest, but you also recharge all of them on a long rest. So that's just, I think, a big different thing is now, instead of it being either or between short rest and long rest, most class features are now partially recharged on a short rest and fully recharged on a long rest. A few differences that I still notice: the monk focus points, which were called key points, now focus points, still all recharge on a short rest. And a wizard's arcane recovery is still only just a once per day feature total. But that once per day allows you to recover spell slots before taking a long rest, basically. I'm sure folks will be able to find out some others that are here and there. I actually forgot. I hope the Battle Master one's still recharged on a short rest, but I'd have to wait until my deep dive into class videos to do that. Speaking of class stuff, and by the way, I plan on doing full deep dives into each class as separate videos so we can really talk about them. But for the purposes of this probably too long video, I'm going to be talking about what I think are the biggest changes, not even necessarily from every class, but just overall. I ended up with maybe half a dozen just big changes from those particular classes that made me go like, oh wow, this is a major change. So the first major change, which is number 16, is that the Bard. I guess I go in and look at the Bard. Bard. We'll get a barbarian, go to Bard. All right, so the Bard no longer has Song of Rest. But we can jump over to Feats for a second, even though I'm going to talk about Feats. If you look at an Origin, so you kind of have to deep dive into some other things. Way to go, Eric. You started talking about class, and I got to talk about other things. So Bard no longer has Song of Rest, which Song of Rest was every short rest, you got to add another, I don't know, D8 or D6. I think it actually scaled up D6, D8, D10 of healing to everybody, which was fine. No longer has that. Instead, you could start with the Musician Origin feat if you started with the Entertainer Origin. And the Musician feat gives you the Encouraging Song ability, which is after you finish a short or a long rest, you can play a song and give heroic inspiration to allies who hear the song. Number of allies equals your proficiency bonus. So basically, you can give most of the party, and soon probably your whole party, inspiration after every short rest. That is humongously powerful. The DM's like, if you're playing with a bard, the DM's like, oh, well, I guess I never have to give out inspiration because you guys are going to always have it. Super powerful, but not a bard ability, technically. Anybody with the musician feat, which you don't have to, which is the entertainer background or the musician feat, can take this ability, which is huge. The other one that's similar is Chef, which is a general feat, and Chef is kind of similar to what Song of Rest was, which is after every rest, you can prepare a meal and then heal everybody with that meal. So basically, they're now feats now instead of a class feature. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Big change for the bard, but man, that musician feat, wow, that seems like a must-have for just about anybody, but especially bards. You have to have proficiency with the musical instrument. I believe musician, you gain proficiency with 3 musical instruments of your choice. Yeah, so boom. Musician's everything you need for that ability. That's so powerful. Jeez. All right, so back to talking about classes. Number 17, the Druid, is a pretty big change, which probably will upset a lot of wild shaping druids. As a DM who has dealt with a lot of wild shaping druids, I think this was a necessary nerf, and it is a nerf, which is wild shape. Wild shape now, again, first of all, you have fewer uses of it. You have 1 whenever you short rest, and all of when you finish a long rest. The biggest change here, however, is you no longer get the hit points of the shape you're turning into, which is mainly a big deal for the Circle of the Moon Druid, who would morph into like these battle shapes, your dire wolves and your brown bears, whatever, and then have, fucking 40 or 60 hit points or whatever that the DM has to chew through. And it just felt terrible as a DM. I mean, it's fun for the player, obviously, but terrible for the DM to be like, oh, well, I got to fight this tank, and then these damage attacks like don't hardly even matter. It's crazy. And they can, do that twice per short rest. It was insane. So, and I love wilds, like anytime, like I grew up on Animorphs, like don't get me wrong, I love shape changing animals, I think it's great. But I think this was a necessary thing, which is now instead of getting any hit points, you gain temporary hit points, and they're kind of a hilariously low number of temporary hit points, equal to your Druid level, which is pretty low. Circle of the Moon obviously gets better than that. I think they get an armor class bonus, and they get like 3 times the temporary hit points. But it's still, that's what it is. You basically don't get your free hit point boost, which I think is a necessary nerf for the Druid. Also, Druid gets the free Find Familiar spell by expending wild shape uses as well. So I plan on doing a deep dive in all the classes, but I thought that was a very big deal. Druid Wild Shape got a big nerf. By the way, Polymorph as a spell works the same way now, where you no longer get the hit points of that creature when you polymorph also. Instead, you just get temporary hit points instead of the hit point buffer. So the offensive polymorph where you buff, because you could use it both ways, right? You can polymorph, which we just did that in one of our sessions. You polymorph a big boss into like a chicken, or you can turn your ally into a, giant ape or something, but you don't get those extra hit points. For number 18, I wrote that the Paladin's Divine Smite is now a spell instead of just a class feature. Not really a big deal in the long run, I think. It's still it's technically a nerf, I believe, because it takes a bonus action now to do your Divine Smite, so that's definitely a nerf, because now it's a bonus action. As a spell, it could technically be counterspelled or be unable to be used in anti-magic field and all that stuff. So Divine Smite has been, put as a spell. However, as compensation, the Paladin, I actually go down to Divine Smite. A Paladin always has 1 use of Divine Smite that they can cast without expending a spell slot, which I think is pretty nice. So you get a free use before you have to start spending spell slots to power your Divine Smites. Otherwise, the Divine Smite still works the same. It still does an extra 2d8 damage, and then you can still spend additional spell slots to buff that damage up. So you get 1 free use every long rest, and beyond that, you can then spend spell slots to do it. but it does take a bonus action and technically counts as a spell. So that is a difference. Not, I don't think, as big a nerf as the Druid, but I think it did need a little bit of a nerf because Divine Smite was very powerful. The Ranger, the poor beleaguered Ranger, very famously was underpowered, maybe a little underdeveloped from D&D 5e. I think Wizards has realized over the years, and players and everybody, that nobody really uses all the like foraging and exploration and stuff. It's still a very underdeveloped part of D&D, which again, hopefully the Dungeon Master's Guide that's coming will maybe shore that up in some way. But for now, the Ranger doesn't affect any of that side of the game. Instead, it's like, let's just focus on the stuff that matters. Let's focus on the stuff that matters, I guess. So favored foe no longer exists. Favored enemy no longer has a whole thing where you're like choosing different, types of creature types and you get bonuses on them. No, it's just Hunter's Mark. Favorite enemy is just, which Hunter's Mark is a spell, which it's always been a spell, right? Favorite enemy is just free uses of Hunter's Mark. That's it. You can use it twice without expending a spell slot and regain all uses when you finish a long rest. And then technically you get more uses out of it as you level up, which these are all uses without expending a spell slot. So you get free uses of Hunter's Mark, and then eventually you can, taking damage, can't break, or concentration on Hunter's Mark at level 13, I guess it becomes better. Yeah, it's an interesting change. I think let's talk about my big class things in general. I don't know if the Ranger is still, it's fine overall. I have mixed feelings about this change, I guess. It's, free Hunter's Mark. Is that good? Probably. You probably have to look at all the subclasses and things in general to make sure that this actually works. But I think it would have been nice to see some specific class features and dive a little deeper into maybe a Ranger having some cool rangery abilities that have to do with exploration, hunting, and stuff, rather than just, let's just take their signature spell and let them use that more. That feels like the easy way to do a better Ranger, and it's not that exciting. So I'm very curious to see, Ranger fans especially, what do you feel about this? Because I was like, okay, that's fine, I guess. Rogue, I think, got some love. And I think it's a good change. I think it's a really good change. They got buffs, I think, for the most part, with, what's it called? Cunning Strike. So not till 5th level. But starting at 5th level, you can use your sneak attack damage. So your sneak attack is going up as you level, which is the exact same, right? You either have advantage on the attack, or you have an ally within 5 feet. And it scales up. It starts an extra 1d6 damage and goes up from there. So by 5th level, you're doing an extra 3d6 of sneak attack damage. However, at 5th level, you can also start using some of that sneak attack damage dice, expending them to then do an extra effect, which is really fun and not quite as, detailed and crazy as like a Battle Master Maneuvers or even maybe the masteries of the weapons, but you can try to trip people. You can try to give yourself a free disengage, although the Rogue already has Cunning action, which gives them a bonus action disengage. Maybe you want a bonus action to other things. Maybe you can use withdraw, for example, to attack somebody, do just 1d6 less of damage, and move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity. So and then you can use your bonus action to hide. So that could be a combo. Or you can poison, which the poison condition is pretty solid. You can give your enemies a nice little debuff just for spending an extra 1d6 of damage. So I think it's a nice effect on there if you want to have your rogue be able to do some extra cool things without just doing pure damage. And none of these things cost that much damage either. So I think that's a neat little buff. And then there's later abilities. Devious Strikes at 14 give you even more abilities, which give you the actual very cool signature like Assassin's Creed stealth style ability. Granted, it costs, I think, just about all of your sneak attack damage at this level, but you can force your targets to make a con saving throw or give them the straight up unconscious condition. So awesome, just knock them out. Finally, rogues get that cool ability where you're just coming up behind them and just fucking, knocking them out, and boom, suddenly we've got our heist mission. Unfortunately, it doesn't come online to level 14, which is a bummer, but still pretty cool, and I like that rogues got some love. And then the second to last class that I will discuss for the purposes of this video, which we are on number 21, for those of you keeping track. Sorcerer has a pretty powerful buff right away at level 1, which is brand new as far as I'm aware of, called Innate Sorcery. As a bonus action, you can just unleash this powerful magical buff effect for 1 minute, which increases the spell save of all your sorcerer spells by 1 and gives you advantage on attack rolls of sorcerer spells you cast. So sorcerers you know, wizards are more going to have all the utility spells and have more options because they have more spells available. Sorcerers have fewer spells available, but can manipulate those spells better to their advantage. And probably more than the wizard, your sorcerer is like your DPS. You know, they're like focused on one thing, and if you're going to be focused on one thing, it's probably going to be damage. So the fact that you can just instantly make your damage better with offensive spell saves or advantage on attacks is pretty damn powerful. You can use it twice for long rest, although it's not one of the abilities that you get a partial recharge, I'm noticing, which is interesting. But that's just a big brand new buff for sorcerers, so that's a huge feature that wizards and their spellcasters don't have. You can just choose to make yourself that much more powerful as a bonus action randomly. So pretty good, and they still have all their, you know, sorcery points and everything else. Finally, my last class feature that I think was a very big change is the Warlock. So the Warlock had a number of changes go through, but I think I'm going to distill the big change into the way let's see, how do I want to word it? I guess it's the Eldritch Invocation. So it used to be your patron was what you chose, I believe, at level 1. Was it your patron or your pact? God, now I can't remember how it worked. There was, I mean, you still chose your subclass at some point. And then you chose, I think if you were like, I think you chose Fiend, Great Old One, and one more, maybe Archfey or something. What was your patron? And then you could choose your pact later on that was like Pact of the Chain or Pact of the Tomb or Pact of the Blade or whatever. Now you choose your patron at level 3. So you choose between Archfey, Celestial Fiend, and Great Old One. But you can choose your pact, which is your blade, chain, or thing, as an invocation at level 1, which is a lot different. So before they weren't invocations, it was just the thing you chose at level 1. Oh, I should have had the invocation thing pulled up, but that's a different section, isn't it? But now, there we go. Eldritch Invocation options. Let's see if that one. Yes, okay. So notice how there's prerequisites for all of them, right? And some of them only require level 2 plus Warlock. Well, the reason it says that is because if you notice, you get 1 invocation at level 1, right? Well, there's only 3 choices at level 1 that you can choose that don't have a prerequisite. Pact of the Blade, Pact of the Chain, and Pact of the Tome. Which are the ones we're all familiar with, right? Pact of the Blade lets you summon a magic weapon that you can use your Charisma modifier for. Pact of the Chain gives you a free, sexier version of Find Familiar spell with like Quasit, and by the way, you get even cooler versions now: Skeleton, Slod, Tadpole, Sphinx of Wonder, or a Snake. So that's kind of cool. Pact of the Tome is pretty much the same. You just get extra spells. They have to be ritual spells. It's a big change. Now they're invocations. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's anything stopping you from picking multiple packs. Right? I didn't see that anywhere in the fine print. So in other words, when you make it level 2, you can suddenly take 3 Eldritch Invocations. I don't think there's anything stopping you from taking all 3 of these, Pact of the Blade, Chain, and Tome. Now, it's not a very efficient build. You know, Tome, you could take Find Familiar with Pact of the Tome. You just wouldn't have the sexier familiars here, for example. And Blade is only useful if you're actually attacking. So it's not the most efficient thing to do, but you could do that. There's still, of course, a lot of other better invocations you can take that scale off of all these packs. But I thought that was a very fascinating and interesting change for the Warlock. I have no idea if it's for better or for worse. It is a little bit odd that you don't pick your subclass to level 3, which actually defines your patron, versus I thought Pact Magic, you are making a pact with a creature. They try to explain the entity is a voice in the shadows, identity unclear, but it gives you the ability to cast spells. So it's like you don't even know where your magic is coming from the first 2 levels, and at level 3 you finally realize, oh, it's a devil giving me my powers. Oh, okay. Whoops. So a very interesting change here for the Warlock, but to me the biggest one is the fact that you can choose, I think, multiple pacts right away, and that they're included as invocations this time. Again, I'll go through my deep dive class videos in the future. All right, that is the classes. Now we're going to talk about backgrounds, which is number 23. Now grant, let's see if we can talk about backgrounds. Where are you? Character origins and background descriptions. Here we go. So these backgrounds are way, way different now. You choose a background when you choose your character creation, and your background gives you a free feat, which we already talked about how Entertainer gives you that powerful musician feat, right? So you get a free feat at level 1. It determines which 2 skill proficiencies you get. I believe your class gives you your other skill options. They either make you choose certain ones or allow you to choose, usually like 2 or 3 from a list. You get a tool proficiency, you get your equipment, and it determines what your ability score bonuses could be. Your options being you can choose one of the 3 it gives you, and that gives you a +2, and the other one of the 2 gives you a +1, or you could choose to do a +1 in all 3 of those. Very interesting, I think. I have not seen this in practice, obviously, but this makes backgrounds a much more critical part of character creation, whereas I think a lot of people just use them purely for flavor purposes, which is fine. But now backgrounds are suddenly involved in the optimization min-max side of things, so I don't know how that affects, people wanting to roleplay certain things while being forced to take certain feats or ability score improvement. So definitely a big change. I'm very curious to hear feedback on whether you think it's a positive or a pain in the ass change, but there's a pretty good amount of, backgrounds. We definitely got more, I believe, than the original book did, and I think it's, instead of giving you a bunch of role-playing notes and like a in-game exploration feature that nobody ever used, it gives you an actual like feat you're going to use all the time and remember about, and it gives you your, skill for ability score. So yeah, I think it's a big deal, and probably positive, but I'm curious to see what everybody's thoughts are for backgrounds being so critical now to character creation. Let's see. We're going to talk about species is new. That's actually included in character origins here. Obviously, we went from race to species, so we're going to all have to get used to that. We removed half-elves and half-orcs. No more half-species, because species, I guess, can't breed with each other, which is interesting. I haven't read all the information about that, or I think half-elves were a little overpowered in D&D, because it's like, you kind of get like the best of all the elf stuff, and they had like really good bonuses and stuff, so maybe it helps balance things around. So we lost those 2 technically, but we added Aasimar, Goliaths, and orcs, and basically half orc and orc is very, very similar to each other. So your species now has so my one thing is no more half species, and there's also no more. Well, actually, no. There are a few sub species. I have to really get used to the nomenclature here. So orc is basically similar to half orc, where you still have that relentless endurance, but now you've got kind of the orcish ability of, getting extra movement and stuff. Now you have, I believe, elf, gnome, and tiefling are the only ones that have, gosh, what do they call them? They're not sub races anymore. Lineages. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Lineage. So gnomes have 2 different, I guess, lineages you can pick between. Elves have 3, including drow, and they all have different ability bonuses. And the tieflings have 3. Everybody else doesn't have any, by the way. So we no longer have different kinds of dwarves or halflings, which is kind of interesting. So they kind of removed some. Basically, the species got juggled around a little bit. So that's all included in basically one big change, I think. 2 big changes I do want to mention for specific species that I think is worth calling out. One of them is the Dragonborn. This is number 25. Dragonborn Dragon Breath weapon attack, instead of it being a full action by itself, can now be used as part of the attack action with one of your attacks. So if you're a fighter, you can still attack with one weapon attack and then use your breath weapon as another attack. That's a really cool feature. I think that's a huge buff. Excuse me. And you can choose to always either do it in a 15-foot cone or 30-foot line. You don't have to choose at character creation which one you're going to use. So that's just a cool buff for a Dragonborn. Also, they can fly temporarily at 5th level. I don't remember if that was always the case. I surely don't recall that. So that's a pretty... Dragonborn, fucking cool buff, I think. And the other one I want to highlight is the new Goliath species. I believe they were available in one of the, we'll call them DLCs for Dungeons & Dragons. At some point, they did release Goliaths, but I don't believe they worked like this, which is basically the Rune Knight Fighter. Shout out to Rune Knight Fighter, where you had a whole bunch of hill or giant runes you could activate to do different effects. These ones aren't, because they're built into your species, not nearly as powerful as the Rune Knight Fighter's ability, but there are some really cool abilities in here. I really want to shout out to this one. You get to use, by the way, you get to pick one of these abilities, which giant ancestry you're from, basically, descended from, and you can use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus once per long rest. Look at the Cloud Giant one. As a bonus action, you magically teleport up to 30 feet to occupied space. You can see you get a free Misty Step as a Cloud Giant lineage Goliath. 2 or 3 times a day in the early game, you can get a Misty Step for a bonus. That's humongous. For a barbarian or fighter gets a free Misty. Oh my. Yes, sign me up for Cloud Giant Goliath. That is amazing. So yeah, that's incredible. That's number 26, that Goliaths get a limited version of Rune Knight Fighter. 27, I will finally talk about feats. Where are my feats at? So we have origin feats, which again are tied to your that initial background you pick, although you can choose origin feat later if you want. They're not only for starters. General, which are just, you can take these feats whenever. I'm not going to go over individual. Well, actually, I will go over. No, I'm not going to go over anyone's. That's actually not including my change. There are some changes. Sharpshooter got nerfed. The ones that involve surprise round, like Alert, got nerfed. I think they were probably necessary nerfs, but I'm not going to go over here in terms of big changes. The big change that I will mention is the Epic Boon is now a thing. So Epic Boon is something that all character classes can take at level 19. And they can just choose one of these epic boons. And these epic boons are, as you can imagine, level 19, they're very super powerful. And one of them gives you like plus 40 hit points. One of them turns you into Nightcrawler, where you can just like teleport after you attack every single time. One of them lets you like try to roll a dice to try to not expend a low level spell slot. There's ones that give you like 60 feet of true sight or damage resistance to multiple damage types. They're very, very powerful. It's almost like the designers just throwing up their hands at the high level and be like, look, fuck it. Like, we'll just put a whole bunch of like a laundry list of cool abilities that people want and just allow you to pick one from there, which is fine, I think. But it's funny that classes do still have their level 20 capstones, but the level 19 thing, I think, is what a lot of people are going to be really excited about. Because like, yeah, I get customized, and yeah, I want to teleport around after I attack. That sounds awesome. So that's 27 is the new epic boons. 28, we're going to go into a few spells, just a few. I'm not going to go too crazy on spells, but I think it's worth mentioning a few that are, that I noticed are like, oh, it's a big deal that these got changed. I think we're going to go into spell descriptions for spells. Okay. Number 28, Counterspell. One that a lot of DMs have had to ban this spell before. C-O-U, where the hell is, there it is, Counterspell. There's a lot of spells. So before, you could use your reaction whenever a enemy, or as a DM of the player, was casting a spell. And if it was level 1 through 3, I believe it instantly canceled the spell's effects. And if it was more than that, then you had to, I think, make a skill check to officially counter that spell. Counterspell has been changed quite a bit now. Now, there is no level whatever. If whatever you're countering, even if it's a level 1 spell, you force the creature who's casting the spell to make a Constitution saving throw, which is a lot different. And if they fail the save, the spell dissipates. Their action is still wasted. However, if the spell was cast with a spell slot, the slot isn't expended. So that allows you to do that to players without necessarily punishing them too badly. And so several changes here, right? One of them is that no longer free counterspell levels on level 1 through 3. No longer have to make an ability check. Instead, you force the creature making the spell to make a Constitution saving throw. And 3, if it does work, or the counterspell is effective at canceling the spell, then the spell slot is not affected. So big changes on counterspell. I don't know. I'd like feedback on this. I haven't seen it in action yet. It'll be interesting to see whether this makes me not hate Counterspell, because I did kind of hate Counterspell. Sleep actually got some change to it. Let's look at Sleep. Eric, you should have had these tabs pulled up already. I had a lot of tabs pulled up, all right? So Sleep used to have this very bizarre holdover from older editions where it was like, hey, it can affect this many hit dice worth of creatures, which basically means after like level 3, you never could use Sleep with any effect anymore, because characters had too many hit points, like you just couldn't do it. So now instead, Sleep is a much smaller zone. each creature of your choice in a 5-foot radius sphere. That is a tiny, tiny area that's at most going to capture maybe 2 or 3 creatures. However, it forces all of them to make a wisdom saving throw or have the incapacitated condition until the end of its next turn. Incapacitated means it cannot take actions or reactions, I believe. And then it must repeat the save, and if they fail a second save, the target has the unconscious condition for the duration, which means they're completely out until they are jostled, or it's the 1 minute is up. It's only a 1 minute spell. So it kind of works like Petrify in a way, right? I think Petrify works like that, where it like slows them first, or restrains, I believe, and then it turns them to stone the next turn. I like this change a lot. Again, I haven't obviously played with these changes yet, but before, nobody fucking used sleep for the reasons I just said, and now it's like, oh, this is like the potential to knock out a group of people, at the very least incapacitate. I guess they would still be able to like scream or something. I don't know. That'd be interesting to have to rule about that. Maybe incapacitated says they can't speak. We'll have to look at that one real quick. Oh, you can't. It does say that you can't speak. Look at that. You guys thought of everything. So you can't take any action, bonus action, or reaction. Your concentration is broken and you can't speak. You can still move, however, I believe. So you could still, so they could, in other words, you're trying to knock people out, they could move that first turn, but they would not be able to speak or perform any actions. And then afterwards, they have to make another save or just be straight up fall down unconscious. So I think it's very interesting. I don't know if people would still use sleep, but before nobody used it. So I'm a favor of trying to make, these spells happen a little bit better. Spiritual weapon, I'm not even going to click on it because it's not a big change, but the big change is it now requires concentration. It did not require concentration before. It was a very, very powerful spell where you summon up another, basically summoned weapon that can attack every turn using your bonus action. Now that requires concentration. I think it just brings it more in line with, every other spell like Flaming Sphere and stuff. So important nerf technically for a spiritual weapon. The Conjure line of creature spells now all do different effects. I'm not going to go over them all, but they're all like before Conjure like summoned those stat blocks of creatures, right? Now, instead of summoning that creature, they use like specific abilities that then grant you different effects. Like Conjure Animals now gives like everybody pack tactics and creates like a little zone of animal. Basically, I think it tries to lower the overhead of players who would summon a bunch of creatures, and then that would just add a lot more to their turn and stuff. So now it tries to give them like similar ability effects, not necessarily adding like a literal creature with a stat block on the thing. So an interesting change right there. There's literally a ton of these conjure spells to go over. In fact, if I, look at all this. Conjure Animals, Barrage, Celestial, Elemental, Fame, Animals, all those things do that kind of effect. However, there is an entire, I believe, new line of summon creature abilities, which now do summon creature stat blocks, but they are all specific stat blocks that scale with the spell, similar to how a Ranger's Beastmaster pet works, where they all scale off of the spell casting rather than being a specific monster from the monster manual. So both of basically all the ways that you summon creatures got, I think, really changed. The conjure spells now summon like things that do things instead of the creatures, and then the summon spells do summon creatures, but they are their own specific, like you're summoning like the Draconic Spirit stat block, and that has different like effects and things it can do that's in the player's handbook. So the player actually has access to all those things versus the DM having the access and have to like give those, character sheets or whatever over. So probably a positive change overall. Also, True Strike. I want to point out the True Strike. This is one of those 2 bullshit cantrip abilities that nobody freaking used because it was super dumb. This is like, hey, you have advantage on attack or something that took an action. By the way, Blade Ward still sucks. I did look at that one. But True Strike, at least, is much better. Now, as an action, this is a cantrip, you make an attack with the weapon used in the spell's casting. So you're, I guess, using it, or it does say a material component weapon with which you have a proficiency with. The attack uses your spellcasting ability for the attack and damage rolls instead of using strength or dexterity. So suddenly you can turn your wizard into that kind of Gish fighter where if you want to be like a Hexblade Warlock, basically, you want to like, hey, I want to use my use this sword, but I want to use my intelligence, instead of, like a Warlock Pact of the Blade uses charisma. You can do that with True Strike, which I think is very interesting. You can also change the damage to radiant damage. So suddenly this becomes a very interesting, flavorful ability, I think, where you can use that kind of character build based around this cantrip. Maybe I'm overvaluing it, overthinking it. That's possible. But before, literally nobody used this stupid bullshit cantrip, and now suddenly it's a very interesting cantrip. So shout out to True Strike, Ringlet Blender. And then the last one I want to mention, number 33, is Witch Bolt. Just because that got a much needed buff. This was such a poorly, or just an under-tuned spell, I think, because it required concentration to do that much damage, required your action. They fixed a lot of that. So now it does twice as much damage on a hit, 2d12 lightning damage for a level 1 spell with a ranged spell attack. And it's concentration, so you're constantly zapping them. Again, picture the Sith like lightning ability. But it now takes a bonus action to continue to deal 1d12 lightning damage to the target automatically, even if the first attack missed, which is also a buff. So your first attack missed, you're still technically shooting lightning at them, and then in the future you can always do that bonus action automatic damage. Now it is broken if they go without 60 feet or they break line of sight with you, but still I think that is a huge, much needed buff for Witch Bolt. So +1 to that. That is 33 changes. It only took us less than an hour to go over all of them. All right, if you're still here, real quick, my top 5 changes out of those 33 that I think everybody should implement right away. Although this is mainly for DMs, I'll be honest. Number 1 is the new surprise round changes. Just disadvantages way more balanced disadvantage initiative than the horrendous like free round for everybody. So that I would change right away. Heroic Inspiration. Not much different there, and I think everybody's probably using it already, which is just that you get a free reroll on every d20 roll, not necessarily just giving yourself advantage, but also the fact that players can give inspiration to each other if they're rewarded one, they already have one. Number 3, Falling in Water, I think is just a really good rule that I would implement immediately, which is you can make a DC 15 athletics or acrobatics check if you're falling in water to have the damage. Number 4, Exhaustion. I know players are probably going to hate dealing with that, but the new exhaustion rules are very nasty. The -2 cumulative to all rolls plus -5 movement for every level of exhaustion is a lot easier to remember, to keep track of, to implement, and I think a lot nastier, so I love it. And then number 5 is just the drinking a potion as a bonus action, because that's something that needs to be done versus having a full action be drinking a potion. And so I wouldn't recommend implementing any of the big class changes or spell changes until you're going to start a full campaign, right? And I'm mainly thinking about, hey, if you're in the middle of your campaign right now, are there any changes you want to make, right away and implement based on this new book? But, obviously talk to your players about it first. Those are the 5 I would recommend. In terms of all the other things, I generally, I think, like all those changes, although I definitely want to hear about your feedback for all of them. But I wouldn't implement them until I was running a full 2024 campaign, and we were obviously using all the new classes and spend. There's other little spell buffs and changes and feat changes here and there. Like I wouldn't implement all that until I was using the full new rule set. But I think with those changes, even if you're playing the 2014 edition still, and for the future, those are the top 5 that I would definitely implement. All right, thank you to everyone for watching this video review breakdown of the D&D Player's Handbook and my top 33 changes. You can look for more D&D 2024 content on the channel, as well as the usual live streams and reviews. And you can support my work at patreon.com/RogueWatson. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brennan, Zensider, Eclectic Roleplay, Roll, Christopher, Gory, Big Nut, John F, John L, Nathan, Camp Crystal, Counselor, Andrew, The Relder, Stephanie, Patrick, Jason, Ismail, Amit, Lippy, Spuds, Sharni, Warden, Harold, Unimona, LLC, Jamie, Reese, Tom, AJ, and They're Eating the Dogs, and Cold patrons: RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Lizard Lounge, Jerome, Nathan, Fazakatora, Scott Rivas, Karen, Jerry, Glenn, Marcus, and Mark. We got it done in an hour. Yes! Thank you all very much for your support.